Assassin's Creed Mirage is the 13th mainline game in the franchise and the first in nearly 10 years that the follow-up game is a direct sequel to the one that came before. While Mirage doesn't do anything new to reinvent itself, it takes great things from the previous games and tries to create a mixture of all those wrapped into a single package. While the combat can be simplified down to attack, parry, counter, just like the old games, some will find it boring, others will enjoy the return to a more familiar combat style. Returning to a more grounded game with no dialogue options and a much shorter story, no RPG loot or gear to stress over, Mirage feels as though they really wanted to take people's complaints and feedbacks from the previous games and try to see what they want out of the franchise, and with Mirage, it feels like a return to an old Assassin's Creed game in the way that we grew up playing them. Wanted to ask a little question for the viewers. What is your first Assassin's Creed game? Mine was Assassin's Creed 2, and I've played all the mainline games besides Assassin's Creed 1 and Liberation, and for the time being, Mirage is as close of an imitation to the first game as we will ever get, short of a full remake.
The feathers forge our paths, remind us of who we are, who we can be.
Let's do the technical aspects here first. Running the game on an RTX 4080 and an i7-13700K with all the settings turned up to the highest possible value, I was getting at most times 144 frames with some dips down to the low 100s in certain instances. Overall, the performance across the board was really good, I would say, for me, with only 2 crashes in my 25 hours of playtime. And with the state of some PC ports like I've mentioned in my past videos, this is a welcome sight, especially from Ubisoft. I do think that with this game originally going to be a DLC for Valhalla, they had to reuse a lot of the systems that were already in place, so you aren't going to see anything in the terms of big graphical jumps for fidelity, but there are some pretty good looking scenes in the game, and I do have a pretty good amount of screenshots taken, so I do touch on it later in the review, but some of the cutscenes have not aged well at all in this game, and I hope it's something they can look into moving forward with their future games. To properly understand the story of Mirage, it almost feels as though you're required to play Valhalla or at least have knowledge of what happens in that game. And that's a tall task for most people, as unlike Mirage, which can be beaten in around 15 hours or so, the campaign of Valhalla will take you roughly 70 hours, and that is just the mainline story. That's why Mirage feels like such a breath of fresh air. It isn't this game that you need to clear your calendar for the month to play just that game and that game only. The reason it also feels like a smaller bite-sized version of a game is because, it really wasn't supposed to be its own game at all. Mirage was intended to be another DLC for Valhalla, but eventually was spun off into its own game, and that's what we have in our hands now. A lot of this is very evident in the cutscenes, others will be fully mocapped and animated to where they really begin to pull you in, and then smash to a one-on-one dialogue scene with someone where your character kind of just throws his hands and the mouth and lip syncing isn't really up to par. You can also see that really evident in a lot of the menus, and it does seem like a lot of reused assets, but in a good way. I want to show you a cutscene from Mirage.
The entire world. I am Fazil Fahim al-Kimsa, first scholar of the House of Wisdom, wisest of the wise. Today, I will shock you with what may sound like outrageous blasphemies. Do not fear, good people. Though I am old, my mind remains sharp as steel.
And then here's a cutscene from Unity.
Taking down imprisoned nobles seems a bit out of his oeuvre. What are the Templars up to?
If we hadn't spent the last year hobbled by your damn truce, we might know that.
Here's a point, Honoré. The truce was with Grand Master de la Serre.
The man's been dead for 2 years. Whoever's in charge now, you can be certain they aren't sitting idle.
We might have learned more had we not allowed Sivert to escape.
Sivert was there?
I know your heart is set on keeping the peace, but bringing Monsieur de la Serre's killer to justice would count for something, wouldn't it?
Can you tell me which one was released first? If you'd ask someone without any video game knowledge, 9 times out of 10, they would say Mirage was the older game, when in fact Unity is creeping up on 9 years since its release. While I believe that Assassin's Creed games have some great stories to still tell, I hope that they go back to the more traditional cutscenes for future games. Also, please, for the love of God, get rid of the 30 FPS pre-rendered cutscenes. If you're going to do them, at least do them in 60. I know it might not seem like a big issue for other people, but it's just a small little nitpick on my end. And the reason that I mentioned the game's expectance for you to know the character we're playing as is because we just spent the better part of a 70 to 100 hour game with them as a side character, and that character is Basim. Basim is one of the first characters that we meet in Valhalla, and if you know why we are playing as him, then you know why. I'll go deeper to that one in the spoiler section of the video. In Mirage, you get to see Basim as a street thief in the city of Baghdad and its surrounding areas, and how he goes from surviving with this group of friends And haunted by mysterious dreams, Basim is constantly worried about himself and the people around him. It isn't until a heist goes wrong that he is forced to join the Assassins, or Hidden Ones as they are called in this time period, thus beginning the story of the game. And I have to say, it was a nice feeling to go back and play as an actual assassin for the first time since 2017. Similar to the last couple of games, Assassin's Creed is the Order of the Ancients investigation. This is where your player is able to take on different missions as you progress throughout the game, eventually culminating in you going down to take down a target. While this hasn't really changed up anything, I would say that a little more interconnectivity between these storylines would be great, because they are very much their own little stories told within their own contained areas. And I would just like to see a little bit more overarching narrative, how they tie into one another. The narrative this time around is going to be a lot shorter than Valhalla, and I wasn't sure how I was going to end up liking a much smaller Assassin's Creed game, but I found the story of Mirage interesting enough to keep me engaged, and I was able to follow along with the plot, not forgetting something that happened 20 to 30 hours ago. I'm looking at you, Valhalla. Considering that I cleared the entire map of all the viewpoints, side missions, and historical sites, everything short of solving all the enigmas, I felt more enticed to go out of my way and fully explore the world, instead of seeing the world as this daunting space with countless map markers littering the way. It was briefly mentioned earlier, but the entire game of Mirage takes place in the city and surrounding wilderness of Baghdad. I'll go ahead and show you the map here so you can get a sense of scale and scope, and I'll go ahead and even compare the size of the map to Valhalla, which is just insane when you look at the two side by side. Large maps don't necessarily mean better, and in the case of Mirage, the smaller maps work to its advantage greatly. Best way to describe the combat for Assassin's Creed Mirage is if they took Valhalla and mixed it with Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood. Nothing fancy, but also rewarding in the sense that you could get into a groove blocking and dodging enemy attacks and moving away from the spammy nature of Odyssey and Valhalla. Once you've played the first couple hours of Mirage, you have seen most of what the combat has to offer. Different gadgets and tools will become available through story progression and or leveling up the skill trees. The past 3 Assassin's Creed games would have this massive skill tree that you would dump points into, and unlocking special skills that would activate button combos. In Mirage, those skill trees have been greatly simplified, and these skills no longer unlock new abilities like in Valhalla, where you could throw infinite axes out of your ass or shoot arrows through walls. But instead, they further expand on the tools that you have at hand. One of the trees is dedicated to your trusty bird Enkidu, who provides a nice little overwatch for you, even allowing you to take control of the bird and target enemies. These skills go further to allow the bird to even see the path of a soldier it's walking, so that it can mark it for Basim when he's sneaking through the enemy base. The Trickster class is the one that I would recommend speccing into early on, as you gain the ability to unlock more tools, thus allowing for a more variety in combat and stealth scenarios. Smoke bombs are more useful than ever, as they'll allow you to quickly go in for an assassination even if you're in the middle of combat, or using them to break line of sight where you can get away and hide. That's one thing I felt was sorely missing from the past installments, and I'm so glad that they brought it back in this release, that tension, that feeling that you get when you're running away, and it's just something that I really missed. The one ability that I would say at first I was a little uncertain about is the Assassin focus that you unlock about a quarter of the way through the game. This allows you to select a number of targets and essentially teleport to their locations, taking them all out in a quick succession. At first I was like, I'm not sure if I like this, don't know how it really fits, and they're trying to go back to the old style feel and you're teleporting around. But once I got it upgraded and was able to take out 5 guards in a row before all of their bodies could hit the floor, I was like, okay, it's cool, you got me. One thing that doesn't get a pass for me is something I do hope that for the next mainline game they redo and rework the parkour system that they switched on over to in Origins. Something about the way that your characters ran the past few games has always bothered me. They never really feel like they're actually running, but more so just jogging or at a brisk run, when the game wants me to believe that they are full on out sprinting. In this game, it's more evident than others. I do think a lot of that does come down from them building this originally as a DLC for Valhalla. They had used the parkour system in place, and it would significantly create more work to make a whole new free running system from the ground up. Now, I don't work in video games, I just play them. Whatever they do for the next game, please just go back to the free running system that you had in Unity. We all know how that game was at launch, but my god, is that parkour still some of the best we've gotten to date. It's the fluidity of the animations coupled with how Arno would shift his weight when changing directions. It all might seem small from a distance, but it's all those small details that make up the great parkour and running system that game has. and it's why we're looking back on it so fondly 9 years later. This is going to be my spoiler section, so if you'd like to stay spoiler free for Mirage, this is your time to skip to the timestamp that is on the screen right now. Now, if you've played and finished Valhalla, you'll know that Basim isn't actually Basim, but he's actually a reincarnation of the Norse god Loki. In Valhalla, when we meet him, he knows that he's indeed Loki, but in Mirage, it's how he discovers that part of him that has been buried for some time. Deep below Alamut, Basim discovers an ancient Isu chamber that finally gives him the answers that he's been searching for the entire game. The dreams that's been haunting Basim were actually repressed memories from when he was Loki, as well as his friend Nihal that was popping in and out of the story. Basim blames her for the way that his life turned out, as he is the one that killed the Caliph during the heist at the start of the game, or so we thought. It's actually revealed that Nihal was just a figment of Basim's imagination, and she never was there the entire time. Now, I have to give a shout out to my friend Harvey Dog, who actually called this one out while we were both going through our respective playthroughs. And as you go on further into the story, you'll see hints and clues that allude to the fact, but it doesn't outright mention it until you get towards the end. And upon leaving the temple, Basim is welcomed back into the Hidden Ones, which does upset his mentor Roshan, who ends up resigning. And now fully remembering that he is the reincarnation of Loki, Basim sits there and he muses that he has been reborn, and he's looking forward to meeting the ones that caused his imprisonment, setting up the character he is at the start of Valhalla. While I think it would have been better to have a little more lead into Valhalla, the overall narrative and story I thought was good, and you can see where they might have been limited in budget or scope, but I like how they fleshed out the story more and the person he was before he became Loki. I'm going to wrap it up here with some final thoughts. Ubisoft has come out and said that commercially Mirage has sold incredibly well for them, declaring it the biggest new-gen launch, with player counts averaging around or above Odyssey and Origins. I do hope that Ubisoft takes the correct feedback from this and shortens the length of any future games down from the length of Valhalla to more similar to this or a little bit longer. It was announced back in 2021 that the next game in the series after Mirage would be titled AC Red, or that's the code name at this time, finally taking us to the Japan-Chinese culture that a lot of people like myself have been begging for them to make from years. Then another game called Assassin's Creed Hex, I believe, which is set during the Salem witch trials, so they've got some pretty good ones planned out there moving forward. And I think that the smart thing for Ubisoft to do would be look at the positives and negatives from Mirage and see how they can be implemented and improved on with those respective games that are coming out. Mirage really is the jack of all trades, master of none, in the sense that not all the systems are perfect on their own, but they do work well enough when combined together. Seeing the story of Basim unfold from the low-life street rat to learning the ways of the Creed and becoming the person that we meet in Valhalla was a fun game, and while it might not be perfect, it does serve as a good reminder to what makes the franchise so great in the first place. Simple stealth with some fun tools and a good story to boot is more than enough for most fans of the franchise, and if that sounds like something you would enjoy, I think Mirage is going to tide you over just fine for the time being. If you did make it this far in my review, I wanted to say thank you for taking the time out of your day, and this has been my review for Assassin's Creed Mirage. Thank you for watching.
Basim ibn Ishaq, you now follow in the Eagle's path.